Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Retro Rocket Wing. The FT Retro Rocket Wing is incredibly easy to build and also builds very fast. One thing I'd strongly recommend is make sure you've already centered your 4 and 9 gram servos and you have your 2 single arms opposing each other. Now this wing will be able to go on any of the versions of our retro rocket. That's our EDF powered retro rocket, our prop driven retro rocket, and also our thrust vectoring prop driven retro rocket. Along with this wing being interchangeable between the different configurations of the retro rocket, you can also add the FT Aura 5 in a pre-configured tune that'll give you amazing features such as air brakes and also differential yaw. We have these tunes already configured for you, and in a single video you'll be able to download the tune that you want, install the Aura, and get all these advanced features unlocked. But for right now, we're going to get our materials in order, and let's go ahead and get started. So you're going to notice in this wing portion of the build that we're going to be installing our servos very soon. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to center all 4 of our servos, and we want 2 servos facing to the left and 2 servos facing to the right. Now it's really important that we center our servos first, and if you don't know how to do that, we have a really good video that we'll link down below for you. So feel free to go ahead and select the servo arms that you see here, center your servos, and then fasten them down just like you see here. So now that we have our servos centered, we're going to go ahead and pop out all the pieces we have for our left and our right wing. The panels for our left and right wing are going to be our 10-inch wide panels. Pop out all the pieces, we'll identify them, and then we'll start putting them together. Now that we have all of our pieces popped out that are loose, let's go ahead and identify each one of them. And after we've identified all the pieces, we can separate the left and right wing and start preparing them for assembly. First, we have our left and our right lower wing skins. Our left and right lower wing skins are going to be where the spars are held on, and also you're going to notice that there's a score cut on the very back. We're going to be removing the foam from that in just a moment to be able to do our C-fold. In the center here, we have our rear and our front spars for our left and right wings. You're going to notice that there's a smaller tab for the rear spar and a larger tab for the front spar. This way you don't get them mixed up. And finally, we have the top skin of our left and right wing. The top skin of our left and right wing are going to be where our servos are mounted, and the servo arms are going to be protruding, so make sure that you open up the little center holes for the servo arms to pop through. And on our top skin, we also have an opening roughly right in the middle, and that's going to be where our polyhedral is going to be applied. In the center here, we have our wing fences. These are going to be actually installed at the final stages of our wing assembly, so put those someplace safe. And just below here, we have our dihedral gauges. These dihedral gauges are going to be very important to give us the proper amount of dihedral in both our left and right wing. Feel free to pause this video right here, make sure all your pieces look just like this, and then we're going to start preparing and removing foam from specific areas on our lower wing, mainly the back C-fold for our rear trailing edge, and also where our spars are going to go. To remove the foam for our C-fold, first we're going to take our razor blade and we're going to cut down about 3/4 of the way through our score cut, just on top of the facing paper. It's always a good idea to dull the tip of your razor blade on a piece of concrete or a piece of sandpaper so you don't accidentally cut through the facing paper. But if you do, don't worry, you can easily repair this area with a piece of tape. As y'all may have saw in our release videos, we do have a monster version of the retro rocket. For this step, this back C-fold is not going to be there, but instead we're going to have a double spar which simply folds over 180 degrees and glues to each other. Now that we've done our score cuts, let's just go ahead and fold this over 180 degrees. I like to use the table as my friend to kind of establish my creases. And if we've gone deep enough, we can easily roll this out. Now that we have this rear channel done, let's go ahead and remove the foam from these areas here where our spars are going to notch into. Easiest way to do this is take a barbecue skewer or the tip of your Phillips head screwdriver and simply press it down in. We don't have to even press up against the facing paper on the bottom, and just peel it out. Feel free to pause your video if you'd like to make sure that your piece looks exactly like what you see here. We have our main channel nice and clear on the trailing edge of our lower wing. We also have all 4 notches of where our spars are going to be seated into fully cleared out. Now that our lower wing skid is prepped, we're going to first practice our C-fold. The C-fold is basically exactly what it sounds. All we're simply going to do is we're going to fold the layer that's movable right on top of the bottom layer. We always like to practice this a couple times to make sure everything seats properly and we have no extra foam. Now I'm going to be using my FT300 glue gun, and you're going to notice that I have my temperature dialed down a lot more than what most people think. A lot of times people think more temperature gives you more work time, but in actuality, it actually just boils the glue. I like to set my temperature between medium and the notch just below it. I got plenty of glue in my glue gun. All I simply need to do is put a bead of glue starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge, and then fold it over. On a C-fold, the back edge should be 90 degrees to the table. Next, we're going to prepare our 2 spars. Now you're going to notice these spars are slightly different in both length and shape, and that's okay. First thing we want to do is fold this over so the score cut is pointing down, and then we can easily crack the foam and fold it over 180 degrees. Once we folded it over 180 degrees, we're going to place just a simple bead of glue, doesn't need to take too much, right down the middle, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Use your hands to press this flat up against the table to make sure both sides of the foam fully meet. You're only going to have a tab on one side or the other. Let's do the same process now on the next piece of foam. Again, we're going to fold it over 180 degrees, make sure it's nice and flat. We're going to place a single bead of glue right down the middle, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Let's repeat this process on all 4 spars so they're ready for both sides of our wing. Now that all 4 of our spars are glued together, we're going to go ahead and we're going to place our spars in position. Now the easiest way to tell which spars are for which side of the wing is based on this edge line that we've included right on this lower surface of our wing. Whenever we put our spars down, we're going to line up the size of the notch and also make sure that the edge line is not covered. So in this case, we're going to press this down on this one. And then we'll take our next spar with the bigger tabs, which will be in the front, and we'll press those into place as well. And as you can see, when we press our spars down into place, the edge line lines up perfectly with the spar that we just put onto our wing. Now that we've done our test fit, we can flip each spar over 180 degrees, apply a bead of glue, and press it down into place. Whenever we press our spars down, make sure that they're 90 degrees from the lower surface of our wing. All right, we're gonna do the same process now on the front. Just carefully lift it up. Still got plenty of hot glue in my glue gun. Stripe down one side, and a stripe down the other. I don't worry too much about putting glue down in the notches. They're mainly to just help with alignment. Again, we're going to press this down for about 30 seconds, or you can think you are my sunshine in your head. Now that we have our spars glued in place, we're going to take the upper and lower surface of the wings and we're going to join them together right on the leading edge here. The easiest way to do this is to take the lower portion of the wing and let it hang over with the spars kind of resting up against the edge of the table, and then take the upper surface of the wing and let it line up to it. Now with the undercut of our laser, I always like to kind of press this together so it shingles together nicely. Take your time and make sure that the tips of your wings line up as close as possible, but don't worry if it's slightly off when we fold this together, because we can always trim the wing to meet up exactly. I like to rip off 2 little 1/2-inch pieces of tape and tag it down on the leading edge on the outer portion and the inner portion of the wing. I'm going to go ahead and do that first, and that way it'll hold it together, and then I can come back with one long strip and go right over top of it. Little strip there. And again, we're going to shingle the upper surface over the lower surface. And a little strip right there. Any 2-inch packing tape will work. You don't need to get too extreme with the strength because this is simply just holding it together and then the glue does the rest of the job. If you need items like our hot glue gun, triangle squares, razor blade, servo centering tools, tape, and so much more, we have a really great crafty kit that's fantastic for all of your flight test projects. I always like to cut off any excess tape that we may have just to kind of keep it from getting in our way. And now you can see that we have a beautiful hinge right on our leading edge. Our next step is to do a double bevel, and a double bevel is going to be right down the center here, and this is going to give us the ability to fold the wing over. To do a double bevel, the easiest way to do it is to take a very, very sharp brand new razor blade, and if you have our Crafty Kit razor blade knife, go ahead and indent it 1 notch. This gives you the perfect angle that you need to cut a very nice double bevel. Making sure that we're holding our razor blade not 90 degrees to the foam, but about 45 degrees to the foam, we're going to make sure that we keep our razor blade just above the facing paper right in the middle. Don't worry, because if you do cut through this facing paper by accident, you can easily repair it with a piece of tape. I'm going to let the trailing edge of my knife ride right along the foam here. We specifically chose this knife because it does a fantastic job in helping us cut our bevels. Now there's lots of scrap foam in our kit, so if you're ever nervous about cutting a good bevel, you can always practice on the scrap pieces of foam before you do it on the real thing. One more now. You're going to notice I'm doing this a little bit steeper than 45 degrees, probably closer to 60 to tell you the truth. And on the top surface of the wing, I'm just going to terminate the bevel cut just as soon as I pass the lower surface of the wing. You don't have to worry, because if you accidentally don't go far enough or you need to make any adjustments, you can always trim it again. It's going to be on the inside of the wing. A really good way to know that you have plenty of a bevel cut is you should be easily able to go past 90 degrees with your double bevel cut before you feel any resistance. Our next step is to establish the airfoil on our upper skin. To do this, I like to take the flat of my hand and I like to just let the foam fold right over top of our score cuts. Now in the past with many of our designs, we'd have you go through with a barbecue skewer. You don't want to do this and open this up any more than it already is with the laser focus, because we want this to be nice and tight, and that gives it a lot of strength. Now that we have our bevel, we can go over and we can slowly start rolling it down with the flats of our hands. You're going to see some tension right on the leading edge. And by the time we get this all the way down, we should notice that the center section here is parallel to the bottom surface. Make sure that your trailing edge comes down to meet the lower surface of the wing, and also that the very trailing edge comes down to meet flat up against the table. Now that we have the general shape of our wing established, our next step is to lock that in with a thin bead of glue. Always check your glue gun to make sure you have plenty of glue, and always have an extra glue stick handy just in case you need it. To do our reinforcement, we're going to press our nozzle right down into the seam that we just cracked, and we're going to press a thin bead of glue in here. Doesn't have to be too much. You can do this one at a time, or you can do all three if you've already built plenty of flight test planes. I'm just going to go on all three. And now I'm going to repeat the exact same step again. When I go down to here, I want to make sure I'm flat up against the spar and that my hands are nice and flat, pressing up against the trailing edge as well. I'm going to go down for about 10 seconds and then lift up. Down for 10 seconds and then lift up. This is really important so you don't accidentally glue the top surface of your wing to the lower surface of your wing prematurely. After you've done this for a couple times, about 30 seconds, you're going to notice that the airfoil is now established on the top skin of our wing. That's exactly what we want to see. Now that we have the upper skin of our wing prepared, you're going to notice a couple X's right next to our servo slots. I put those there specifically so you know exactly what side to put your servos on, because if you put 2 on one side and 2 on the other, all your servos are going to move the same direction instead of opposing, and we don't want that. It can be tuned out through the Aura or through other configurations, but it's going to be a lot of hassle for you. The positioning of the servo is very important. We want to make sure that our servo arm is centered between the notch, and pretty much the body of the servo is going to go right over top of our X. A couple things you're going to notice is that the main body, the main portion of the servo arm is pointing forwards toward the leading edge, and we're going to do the exact same configuration to the servo next to it. I always like to kind of give our servos just a little bit of a scratch. You can do this with sandpaper or your razor blade. This helps to have extra bite, and keep in mind, once these servos are glued in place, you're going to have to cut the wing apart to get access to it. So make sure they're glued nice and solid. I'm going to put a healthy little drop of glue, not so much that we're going to have it screwed up to our arm. Then I'm going to go back right over top of that X, and I'm going to take my time, make sure that my servo arm is going right through the center of the notch. I'm going to press this down nice and tight. Give this a good minute to minute and a half to fully dry before moving on to the next step, which is our other servo. And same process as before, we always like to do a quick test fit. Make sure we're happy with how everything looks. Don't get this so far forward where it's going to touch your spar. Pretty much right over the X. Scratch this up very carefully. Put a healthy bead of glue down, and then press it into place. The only thing that you're going to notice on our monster version is that the servos are going to be bigger. The servos, depending on the configuration, may be either the 20-gram servos, the FT20Gs, or our 3005 servos, which are our monster servos if you're going with an EDF. That's going to be up to you to choose and to install. Just to keep things easy, I'm going to take a little tiny piece of tape, and I'm going to set this down so both of our wires kind of pigtail out the side. This way, as I fold this over, we're not going to accidentally glue these wires in between the spars and the upper wing skin. Let's do one last test fit to make sure our servos don't impact our spars. If they do, no problem, just notch out the spars a little bit if they're a little too far forward, and we're ready to glue it down. And we're going to go over, we're going to press this down, and as you can see, my upper and lower surfaces are parallel on over the spars, and my trailing edge comes down nice to meet the table, and also the trailing edge of the lower wing skin. I'm going to reach into my magic drawer here, pull out an extra glue stick because I'm definitely going to need it, and we are now ready to glue our wing skins together. My first step here is I'm going to apply a bead of glue right down the leading edge. I'll skip over where the dihedral is, and I'll stop about 1/4 inch from the edge. Next bead of glue is going to be right on top of my spar. You can see you don't need to rush anything. Just running out of the glue stick there. There we go. Final bead of glue right down the trailing edge. And now we can fold it right over like we've done many times. I'm going to go ahead and use the flat of my hands and just kind of press evenly right over the top of the spars and also on the trailing edge. Depending on how big of hands you have, you can do this in many different ways. The important thing is that we're not pushing down with the tips of our fingers, but gentle pressure with the flats of our hands. Now that we've waited about a minute, minute and a half, we're going to lift up. We shouldn't see anything open up on us. I also like to always go down and check to make sure that the trailing edge is firmly against the bottom here. Also, a really good indicator that your wing is folded properly is if the hinge line and the trailing edge are close or perfectly parallel. Now that our wing is fully glued down, we're next going to apply the proper amount of dihedral. Before we do that, we want to go ahead and take our razor blade. We'll open this up all the way. We're going to go down right between the notch of our upper wing skin, and we're going to cut out the spar material in a V shape. Doesn't have to be perfect, but basically all we want to do is we want to be able to kind of remove and open that cavity up so the wing can easily crush down in that area. I like to take a screwdriver or a barbecue skewer once I made my wing slots and just kind of poke those out. Don't even need to really retrieve them, you just need to get them out of there and push them out of the way. Now once you remove this area, you should easily be able to lift up the tip of the wing, and you can see that this gap closes, giving us pretty much close to the perfect amount of dihedral. To get the exact amount, all we simply need to do is go to the area that's between the two spar score cuts and press this down. Now that we have our dihedral gauge between our two score cuts that go right over top of our spars, and we tested out our fit, I'm going to make sure I have plenty of glue in my hot glue gun. I'm going to place a bead of glue right down between our two wing skins. This would also be a good time to have a scrap piece of foam handy. to make sure that we scrape off any excess, I'm going to give an extra little squirt right over the spars and then go down in. Now we can hold this down. I'm going to take my scrap piece of foam here. I'm going to wipe off any excess that we may have, and we're going to let this dry. Once we let this dry, I'm going to go back with one more coat right over this seam, and I'm going to take my scrap foam and scrape off the excess. Give this at least a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, just like you did with the upper wing skins, to make sure that it does not open up. And once a minute to a minute and a half has passed and you lift up your hands, nothing should be moving for you. We're going to go back and do one more reinforcement bead right over the top. Don't worry if it's not perfectly over the seam, because when we go back over with a scrap piece of foam, it's going to press it down in. At this point, our left wing panel is now done. We're going to do the exact same process on the other side. First, we're going to remove the channel from the trailing edge of our lower wing skin. After we practice our C-fold to make sure everything fits nicely, we can do the same process over again and lock it down with a bead of glue. Remove the foam from the foam tab so our spars can fit in place. Test fit your spars. Once you're happy with the fit, go ahead and glue them down. After our spars are glued down, we're going to join the upper and lower wing skins to the leading edge. Use tape to tack down the leading edge on both the center and the outer panels of the wing. Take your time and overlap the upper wing skin over the lower wing skin. And afterwards, lock it down with a piece of 2-inch tape. With our wing panels joined, we're going to do a double bevel right along the leading edge. Make sure when you do your double bevel that you can easily go up to at least 90 degrees with no resistance. We're going to practice making our airfoil by first applying a slight crease to the 3 score cuts. And as we fold over the wing, we're going to make sure that the area over the spar is parallel to the lower wing skin, and that our trailing edge is flat up against the table and also the rear trailing edge. It's always a nice idea when practicing these folds to line up the left with the new right wing and make sure that both sides are even with each other. This tells you that you're consistent in your build. Once you're happy with the upper wing skin and its shape, lock it down with a thin bead of glue right over the score cut. And repeat the same practice fold. Make sure that you periodically lift up your upper wing skin so you don't accidentally glue it shut. Once you've locked in your upper wing skin, install your 2 servos on the upper wing skin of your right wing. Remember when gluing down your servos to make sure that the glue does not squeeze over your servo arm and that your servo arm is centered in between the slot of your upper wing skin. Use a small piece of tape to be able to guide your wires to make sure you don't accidentally glue them between your upper wing skin and your spar. Now would be a great time to do one last check to make sure that you don't have any contact between your servos and your main spar, and that your wing still folds over just like it did before. And it'd also be a great time to bring your two wing panels together to make sure that you don't have any kind of center fit issues and that they're going to line up nicely. Make sure you have an extra hot glue stick at hand and place a bead of glue right down the leading edge, the top of each spar, and your trailing edge. Fold over your wing one last time and make sure that you put even pressure across the top of your spar, making sure it's parallel to the bottom wing skin, and also plenty of pressure on your trailing edge, making sure the trailing edge touches the table and also the back of your trailing edge. With our upper and lower wing skins glued together, open up the channel in between the slot in the middle of your upper wing skin. Remove the foam from in between the spar with either a barbecue skewer or a screwdriver. Make sure that you can easily lift up the outer panel of the wing with no resistance and apply your dihedral gauge. Keep a scrap piece of foam handy and open up the slot between your outer and inner wing and place a bead of glue facing just on the side of your foam. Put a little bit of extra glue right where your spars meet your upper wing skin. And finally, we're going to press the wing flat up against the table, letting the dihedral gauge give us the perfect amount of dihedral, and we're going to use a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any excess. Once this bead of glue is dry, we're going to apply an additional bead of glue right over top of the upper wing seam and then squeegee off the excess. Our left and right wing panels are now done. Our next step here is to prepare the center so we can glue it together. You're going to notice on both wing panels that there's a little bit of spar protruding out. First thing we want to do is we want to cut that off. So as you can see, both of our pieces don't line up absolutely perfectly, and that's okay because an easy way to do this is two different methods. You can go outside, you can go to maybe a concrete sidewalk with a little bit of a grit, and you can drag your center wing panel back and forth, and it'll level it out and true it up. Now it's snowing outside, so we can't do that. Another easy way is take a piece of sandpaper. I got this awesome 2-inch sticky back stuff. I'm just gonna lay this right on my work table. Just like that. And then we can drag our wing panel back and forth. Take your time and make sure that whenever you're sanding your wings to get the center sections perfect, that you're holding it perpendicular to the table. And once you're happy with it, you'll see that they meet up very nicely, just like what you see here. And just like we did on the leading edge here, I like to kind of use a little piece of tape to tack this down before I put my main piece of tape right over top of it. So you can kind of reposition it. Just looking to get that trailing edge just perfectly lined up, just like that. Once we have it tacked down, we'll place a 2-inch piece of tape right over top of the seam. That's perfect. go into my magic drawer here, grab an extra glue stick. And at this point, we're gonna place a healthy bead of glue on one side on the full perimeter, including the spars. Make sure that both sides of your servo leads are free and clear and that you don't accidentally glue them inside the plane. Again, you don't need to panic or rush. I'll put a glue stick in here. There we go. I always keep a little bit of scrap pieces of foam handy just to wipe off any excess that we may have. There we go. Finally, we're gonna place this flat up against the table here. All of our servo leads are cleared. And we're just gonna hold this down and let it fully dry. You can see I'm kind of placing my hands not right on top of the glue, but just pressing down to make sure everything's flat up against the table. I even left my 2 dihedral gauges on just to make sure that everything is supporting at the proper angles. Give this at least a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, and then we're gonna go back with a bead of reinforcement glue, and then we're gonna seal it all off on the very top with a piece of tape. And I'm just gonna go right over top of this. This extra bead of glue that we put on after we seam everything together adds an incredible amount of strength. And when we follow up with a piece of 2-inch tape on top of it, this center section of the wing is going to went nowhere. All right. Now that our wing is joined and taped together, our next step is to cut the single bevel cuts in all 4 of our elevons. Make sure you go back after we cut our bevel cuts and reinforce it with a bead of hot glue. We're gonna go ahead and do that right now. You're gonna notice that we have a score cut all along here, but the etch line is gonna be on the side of the elevons. Go ahead and carefully cut through each vertical line, releasing our elevons. Make sure you use a sharp razor blade for this step. Now that we've cut our vertical lines releasing our elevons, we can go ahead and fold this over 180 degrees very carefully. And then we can proceed to cut our bevel cut on all 4 of our elevons. And you can see I'm kind of tearing a little bit there. I'm just gonna go ahead and switch my blade around here to the new side. There we go. Now you're gonna notice whenever we move this up and down that we have a little bit of resistance here. You can take a push rod or even the back side of your razor blade and open up this cavity just a little bit by dragging it through a couple times. A little bit more. There we go. I'm going to use my dihedral gauge that I don't need anymore, and I'm going to do a hot glue reinforcement hinge. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to take our bead of glue and we're going to push the nozzle right down in the center and put a thin ribbon of glue right where the foam meets the facing paper. Now we're not going to leave this on. We're going to take our scrap piece of foam and we're going to scrape off any excess and also push the glue inside the foam and the paper. This is going to unite the foam and the facing paper, making a really strong hinge for you. Let this fully dry, and you can even lick the tip of your finger and drag it over, and this will rapidly dry it so it doesn't stick. Let's do the same process now on the other 3 elevons. For this step, sometimes it's easier just to basically remove your razor blade and to hold it in your hand. Now in our kit, we're gonna have some push rod material just like what you see right here. There's gonna be plenty of material for even make mistakes, but the nice thing is with our new linkage stoppers, we don't have to do a double Z-bend anymore. We can install these in a matter of seconds, and all we need to do is cut this to the proper size, bend a new Z-bend, and do the same all the way down the wing. The first thing we wanna do is install our push rod wire into the outermost hole of each of our servo arms. Using a pair of side cuts, or needle nose pliers, we're gonna go back just beyond where the slot for the control horn begins. So this is roughly gonna be about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch beyond the hinge line and about 1/8 inch beyond the slot. We want just a little bit of extra material here, but not too much where it's gonna bind or hit the elevon. Once we have one push rod done, let's go ahead and bend a new Z-bend, and we're gonna continue down, making sure that we face the push rods towards the outer wingtips as we slide them into the servo arms. To do a Z-bend, it's very simple. We're simply going to take a pair of pliers, and we're going to grip it about 1/4 inch from the edge. We're going to fold it over 90 degrees. Now holding the push rod sideways, we're going to go up about 2 millimeters, and we're going to grip this so the wire is going perpendicular to the pliers. Now we can bend it 90 degrees one more time. This is what we call a modified Z-bend. Modified Z-bends have a lot of uses, and we'll even show you that later on when we do our thrust vectoring option with the retro rocket. But for this case, I want a standard Z-bend. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab this, again holding the wire perpendicular, and I'm gonna slowly rotate this 90 degrees. And when we're done, we're gonna have a nice Z-bend. Feel free to practice this on your scrap wire. It's really easy to do, and the more you do it, the better they'll look. Same process as before, just a little bit of rotation. Don't worry if our servos move a little bit. All we need to have them is close to center, because when we center everything up, the linkage stoppers will ultimately be what decide the angle or the reflex that we have. Same process as before, about 3/8 of an inch back from our hinge line. And let's do it again. 1/4 inch in, bend it to 90, 2 millimeters, bend it to 90, rotate 90, Z-bend. This time I'm going to be going the opposite direction. And one more. Made this one just a little bit longer than I like. There we go. With our one wire, we had enough to make all these push rods that you see here. Our next step is to install our linkage stoppers on our control horns and install them into the airplane. In our kit, you're gonna see our wooden control horns that you're probably very used to. We also have premium control horns, so if you wanna upgrade to the plastic nylon control horns that we carry, feel free to do so. The same process applies to both. I got all 4 of my control horns popped out. I'm gonna open up my linkage stopper kit. This linkage stopper kit can be purchased separately, or is also included in our Retro Rocket prop power add-on. Now it's important when we put these linkage stoppers in that we go to the outermost hole of the control horn. The closer you go, the more deflection you're gonna have, and this plane is specifically designed to get the optimum throws from the outermost hole. All we need is a light twisting motion, pass it on through, and we'll take our little rubber stopper and we'll press it on the back. I don't like losing these screws, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get a couple threads in of each screw. And just like our servo arms, we're gonna have 2 linkage stoppers pointing to the left and 2 linkage stoppers pointing to the right. You're gonna see these come in packages of 6 here if you buy them separately. Go ahead and save these extra 2 for an additional project, or if you go ahead and visit the prop power add-on with the thrust vector, you're definitely gonna need these. Let's go ahead and first do a practice test fit of our control horn and our linkage stopper. All we need to do is pass it on through, make sure that the screw of the linkage stopper points out towards the wingtip, and then easily just press it right into the slot. You should see that your linkage stopper lines up exactly over top of your hinge line. This is gonna give you even throw up and down. Once you're happy with the fit, you can go ahead and unseat it from its slot, put a bead of glue down, and then press it back in. We're not gonna worry about tightening down the linkage stoppers until we power it up either through the receiver, our servo centering tool, or our FT Aura 5. Let's do the same process now on the other 3 control horns. Pass it through the barrel. Press it down, make sure the fit's good, and then glue it in. Two down, 2 to go. Our last step in the Retro Rocket wing is to put on our wing fences. Now if you have our optional decals that you purchased, that would probably be a good time to put this on, or if you want to do any painting. These wing fences can also be installed at the very last step before you go out and fly. To install our wing fences, first we're going to do a test fit, and we're going to make sure that we line up with the seam line, just like you see here. Simple bead of glue is all we need to glue this down. And then we can take this little tiny tab at the very back. We've already test fit this, and we can press it down into place. Hold your wing fence perpendicular to the center section of the wing and let it fully dry. I always like to give a reinforcement bead of glue right down on the inside of the wing here, just to make this nice and durable. All right, our left wing fence is down. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the right side. At this point, our retro rocket wing is now done. We are ready to move on to our next step, which is installing the receiver. Now, if you're going to be doing this as a basic Elevon mix, you can feel free to install your 2 Y connectors that are included in your prop power add-on for the retro rocket. Now, if you want to install the Aura and unlock a whole bunch of awesome features, now would be the time to do that as well. But that's going to be in a different video. I hope you had as much fun as I did building the retro rocket wing, and we'll see you in the next build.